If you're tired of surface-level history and want the truth behind the front lines, subscribe now. Today, we're breaking open a forgotten piece of the past that kept people alive when armies marched, fuel ran out, and winter did what it has always done best. Cold has always been the real enemy. Not armies, not politics, cold. It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't care who's right. It simply drains heat, strength, and life until something fails. Long before central heating, long before insulation had brand names, ordinary people learned this lesson the hard way. Survival through winter had nothing to do with clever gadgets. It depended on stopping air from moving through walls, and the solution wasn't hidden in a workshop or a laboratory. It was stacked outside the barn. Why cold killed more reliably than conflict? Across history, exposure killed more civilians and soldiers than weapons ever did. Drafty buildings meant frozen water, damp clothing that never dried, and constant heat loss that no fireplace could overcome. Fire warms air, but moving air steals heat faster than flames can replace it. People learned quickly that if you couldn't stop drafts, you couldn't survive long winters. This is where hay and later straw entered the equation, not as feed, not as bedding, as insulation. Farmers understood something engineers would later formalize. Heat escapes through air movement. Stop the air and you stop the cold. Why hay worked when walls alone failed? Hay and straw are mostly air, not empty space, but millions of tiny trapped pockets. Those pockets slow heat transfer dramatically. When packed correctly, they block drafts without crushing the air spaces that give insulation its power. The science is simple. The execution took, generations to refine. Across pre-industrial Europe and early North America, families packed hay into walls, under floors, above ceilings, and around the exterior of buildings. They didn't call it insulation, they called it winter preparation. In places where timber was scarce and firewood limited, hay became a thermal shield that could be adjusted, removed, and reused every year. This wasn't a regional trick. Alpine villages used it. The Scottish Highlands used it. Eastern Europe used it. Early American frontier settlements rediscovered it independently. The same idea kept appearing because it worked. How hay turned weak structures into livable shelters. Early homes leaked heat constantly. Thin planks, poor joinery, open gaps, and minimal glazing meant warmth escaped as fast as it was created. A fireplace only heated the air it touched. Everything else vanished into the night. Hay changed that balance. Walls banked with hay held warmth long after the fire burned down. Floors insulated from below stopped cold from creeping up through frozen ground. Attics layered with dry plant fibre prevented heat from escaping upward, where most warmth is lost. People noticed the difference immediately. Diaries from cold regions mention winters where families used nearly half the firewood of neighbours who didn't insulate this way. That reduction wasn't convenience. It was survival when supplies ran thin. How animals taught humans the lesson first. Farmers didn't invent this idea in isolation. They observed it. Livestock buried themselves in hay mounds and survived nights that froze water solid. Chickens lived through winter in hay-lined coops without added heat. Pigs slept in straw while frost crept inches away. The logic became unavoidable. If hay could trap enough warmth to keep animals alive, it could do the same for people. Homes were treated like barns. functional, protected, efficient. You know, insulation became a system instead of just a pile. This wasn't simply random stacking. Skilled farmers, well, they treated insulation as a seasonal system. Hay was packed densely enough to block drafts, but not so tightly that the air pockets collapsed. And, of course, any damp material was replaced immediately, because moisture destroys insulation value and, honestly, it invites rot. Extra layers went up ahead of severe cold and came down during milder periods. Some households, interestingly, built temporary outer walls each autumn, creating cavities packed with hay. Then, in spring, the outer wall came down, and the hay returned to animal bedding or compost. Zero waste, zero cost. This kind of adaptability, well, it's something modern construction has almost completely lost. Wartime pressure, you know, really revived some of those forgotten insulation skills. During World War II, fuel rationing forced civilians to relearn old knowledge, and they had to do it quickly. Coal and oil were both diverted to the war effort, leaving households to fend for themselves. Interestingly, rural families who still remembered using hay for insulation managed to endure those harsh winters far better than folks who were dependent on purchased fuel. Banking walls, stuffing crawl spaces, and sealing drafts with plant fibre. These became quiet acts of resilience. There were no manuals, and certainly no official programs. It was just inherited knowledge, quietly resurfacing under pressure. And, well, this method still applies today in very practical terms. The physics, after all, haven't changed. Straw, as long as it's kept dry, remains an effective insulator. Straw bales are now standardized and, honestly, quite easy to work with. When you stack them against exterior walls, especially on the north and west sides, they form a powerful seasonal thermal buffer. If you cover them on top to shed rain and snow, they can dramatically reduce heat loss. Inside, straw can be packed into attic spaces, behind temporary walls, or into floor cavities. The results are immediate. Wood stoves burn longer, indoor temperatures stabilize, fuel consumption drops. The process is, honestly, pretty straightforward. Use dry straw, not feed hay. Place it snugly with no gaps at all. Protect it from moisture and, well, make sure you preserve those air pockets. Keep an eye on it and replace any damp sections as needed. Why does this knowledge still matter, you might wonder? Cheap energy kind of erased the need for manual insulation. Foam and fiberglass replaced plant fibre, just like that. The skill faded because, well, the pressure faded. But, as history shows us, pressure always returns. This isn't nostalgia, not at all. It's preparedness. Hay insulation wasn't just quaint. It was optimized through centuries of trial and error. It required no factories, no specialists, and absolutely no supply chains. If this deep dive sharpened your understanding of how the past solved real survival problems, do subscribe to Warfare Frontlines and share this with someone who still believes old knowledge has nothing left to teach us.